Get ready to be inspired by the great things happening in rural education. The Rural Scoop will bring you new ideas and innovative solutions. We'll dive into education issues and we'll highlight what's working in your rural communities. You will hear from a variety of educators, administrators, professionals, and others who will provide relevant and engaging content in each episode. And now, serving up the scoop, here's your host, Dr. Melissa Sadorf.
Welcome back to the Rural Scoop, where we talk plain sense about the work of leading in rural places, what's working, what's hard, and what we're learning together along the way. Some of our guests talk about rural schools from a distance, but that's not the case with my guest today. Casey Jacubowski has lived them from classroom to district office to policy table, and then he's turned those lessons into books that are also paired with training and then just some plain-spoken advocacy. He's a social studies teacher at heart and a rural educator and a scholar by training, and a strategist who builds practical tools for small systems under big pressure. So today we're going to be digging into his road from upstate classrooms to author and consultants, and what he's learned about consolidation politics and urban normative policy and the Monday-ready moves that leaders can make to help make great teachers and strengthen community trust and protect what is uniquely rural about our schools. So let's jump in. Casey, thank you for being here.
Oh, Melissa, it is my honor and privilege to be able to talk about something I'm so passionate about, which is rural education. As we know, the numbers are close to 40% of all of our schools in America are rural. And I come from rural New York, and people are like, bah, you have a big city. Well, no, we've got a lot of really nice, awesome spaces, especially in our, quote, upstate area. So when I talk about rural from New York, people are like, that doesn't make any sense. But I love talking about it.
Yeah, and that's such a good point, Casey, that I don't think people realize there are rural areas in all 50 of our states. And they don't think about it, especially with an urban-centric state like New York. Or for my state of Arizona, it's, the great state of Maricopa, because everything is so Phoenix-based. So I understand exactly what you're saying. And I guess if that's, maybe we're done here, because now we've been able to let people know that rural exists everywhere. And of course, I'm kidding. But I want to start with your through line. You have had a very unique opportunity in your professional career to do so many things: classroom, district, higher ed, consulting. Can you talk a little bit about that journey? And then also layer in, you've had rural education as your lane, and I understand that completely, the attraction of that. But what is it that really has impacted your work, and why do you stay rural?
Well, Melissa, that's a great starting question. When you take a 22-year-old out of suburban Buffalo, New York, and send them to a teacher training school, you think you're going to go back to your school where you grew up. And one of the areas was in the 90s when I graduated. We had a teacher glut, believe it or not. I know nowadays it's like, what are we talking about? But part of it was I happened to take a position in a very small district. And I was all ready to do social studies. And then they said, we're going to have you teach 4 courses at the high school level. And I was like, I can do that. And they're like, whoops, we're sorry. We actually meant middle school too. And I went, sure, whatever. I'm 22, like to have a job. I can do this. And one of the last things the district interview team said to me was, oh, by the way, we're in the middle of a consolidation study. Don't worry about it. Jobs will be secured for a few years. And I went, okay, because I hadn't heard of this. And so I arrived my very first year, and there were typical rural issues. We were a small K-12 building. We had a lot of people working multiple ways, multiple shapes, multiple forms, really cool stuff. And I burned out. Surprise, surprise. And so I took my show and my then fiance, now ex-wife, on the road. We moved out to central New York, where we were at a little bit bigger of a district. Only this time, they had gone through a consolidation and created a new name. I was at a district where we didn't necessarily look to consolidate, but boy, oh boy, you would notice things. And I thought, wow, this is interesting. And I started my master's degree at SUNY Binghamton. And at my master's degree, they're like, well, you need to study some historical happening. And I thought, okay, I'm going to look at the history of school consolidation in my old district and the district that we live near. And as I was working on it, I found this amazing 70-plus year record. And I thought, ooh, this is interesting, especially when I started to see the stuff that was in the state archives about these centralizations and consolidations. So I wrote my master's thesis and I moved away. And then I later went to work for the state education department, where I was sent into very suburban, very urban districts. And I kept thinking, you know, when I was teaching in my rural districts, we were having some of the same struggles, but we never got a team of 15 people from state ed to help us. Yeah. We never got all these resources. And, you know, as accountability started to move in and the questions about graduation started to bubble up at the federal level and No Child Left Behind, I kept thinking, you know, this is something that we have to pay more and more attention to. And so when I was in my doctoral program, I wrote my dissertation on state policy in New York towards these rural schools. And I thought, all right, well, let me use some case studies. As a historian, I'm very comfortable looking at all these things.
Sure.
And Melissa, I'll tell you what was amazing was it keeps happening. The same narrative keeps happening. Get bigger, get better, be more efficient, be more effective. And yet, when you look at it, the bigger urban schools are being told, be smaller, be more friendly to kids, do work with children and families. And I thought, so for rural kids, we got to get bigger, but for urban areas, we got to get smaller. And that got me on an advocacy kick. And I had the opportunity to go into higher education where I was teaching folks. And one of the points that I learned very early on was that in a lot of our colleges, because they're so urban based, almost all the folks coming out with doctorates are very, very, very hyper focused in on urban issues. And for we few, oh, we glorious few, to quote Henry and Shakespeare, on that crispin day of doing the work that White and Corbett talk about, you're so influenced by it, it becomes part of your life. It gets in, it gnaws at you. And then doing that work, what I realized was that we have a lot of students that aren't coming out of our schools wanting to be teachers because they see what mom or dad or uncle or aunt are going through. And they're like, no, fam, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
And when we do have teachers who want to come out, they're like, can we do that suburban school? That feels kind of nice, only having to do 1 or 2 preps and go to the bathroom and parent support, and you don't have to be collecting clothes and food every other week. And I can't even tell you how much money I spent on FFA fruit. Loved it, but boy, oh boy, who got oranges for my first 4 Christmases as a teacher? Go FFA.
So that is a lot there, Casey, and I want to unpack it strand by strand. So let's start with urban norms and how they really don't align with rural realities, because you have often argued that policy is designed around urban assumptions, just like what you're talking about. So what are the 2 urban normative ideas that break when they hit a rural district, if you had to pick just two? And what's a better fit that you've seen actually work?
That's a great question. Shout out to Alex Fulkerson or Alex Thomas and Greg Fulkerson of SUNY Oneonta, who've run this series on urban normatives and metro centers. And I want to say huge shout out to our Australian colleagues who, every time I turn around, I'm citing something from them because they're so far ahead of us. And number one, if you're not actively bringing to the table, you wind up what is the statistical problem of the condemnation of small numbers. So you think about it, the first policy is we want to hold people accountable and we're going to make sure that we use our numbers to do that. Well, what happens in Albany, New York doesn't fly in Addison, New York. It doesn't fly in Adirondack, New York. And partially it's because we know from the work that we're doing, a lot of our kids haven't been exposed to what urban and suburban kids are exposed to. So one of the best questions I remember on the state test, and I still can't believe they did this, they asked about a subway. And for children in upstate New York, there are 4 subways. Okay, one of them's in Buffalo, one of them's in Rochester, one's in Syracuse, and then the rest of them are in New York City and downstate. At the same point in time, the urban advocates were very upset that there was a question about cows on a different test. And they're like, oh my gosh, our kids in the city have never seen a cow, moo cow, why are we? And, you know, the bigger outcry was because the urban kids didn't know what a cow was. That's not fair. If we continuously say zip code should not impact your future, why is it okay for us to say zip code should not impact your future except for rural kids?
That's a great question, and one that we have asked perennially.
And, you know, it's really interesting because when I got really upset and angry about this, I humble brag for a second. I wrote a book called 𝐿 Cog in the Machine. And what I talked about in that book, 𝐿 Cog in the Machine, was how I was influenced by what I saw. And I hate when people say, oh, you know, rural communities are less than. No, they're not. They are what they are. You know, you've got moments where you're like, they could be doing better. But then again, everybody gets those moments. What we have to do is stop saying, oh, they could be doing better because they're rural. That to me is the bridge too far. And I wish very passionately that what we did as a society, especially in the United States, is we want our rural kids to have as many opportunities as the suburbanites and the urbanites.
Sure.
That's it. End of story, period.
Yep. Let's jump into that consolidation piece that you talked about, because you studied failed consolidation attempts, which is intriguing to me. I did my dissertation on the fiscal impact of closures and consolidations in rural schools here in Arizona. But I didn't look at failed consolidations. So talk a little bit, Casey, about when mergers might make sense. And then on the flip side of that, when they do more harm than good.
Oh, Melissa, that's such a wonderful question. And congratulations on attacking that in your dissertation, because one of the biggest crises that we have right now is a cyclical situation where, as the economy has trouble, the first thing people start to say is maybe we have too many rural schools. Maybe we need to get them to merge. Maybe we want to get them to consolidate. Maybe we want them to reorganize. But one of the things that I noticed in my dissertation and in my deeper research in my rural education history book was this point. There's a cognitive dissonance between what the policymakers, what the boards are saying, often what the higher level professionals are saying in a school than what the people are saying, because education finance is complex.
Yes, it is.
And a good consolidation, a good merger has to happen when both parties look at this and go, we got to do this for the kids. We got to do this for each other. This is a no-brainer, people. A bad centralization happens when people go, we kind of feel like we're forced into this, so we got to do it in order to survive. And then what happens is for 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years, people go, they took our school away from us.
Yep.
What's even worse is when the state keeps going, come on, try to merge. You can do it. If you take a horse to water, you can't make it drink, but you sure as heck can drown. And for a lot of communities in upstate New York that have been through this for the last 70 years, it's brought up almost once a generation, which means the Band-Aid pulled off, the wound is gaping. Folks who may not be aware of this, they come in and they're like, we got to do something. Why not look at this? And then people are like, them's fighting words. But in reality, what we're seeing is because of America's disinvestment in education, even though we're at an all-time record amount of money going into the system, what we're seeing is we're seeing more and more communities going, okay, that's wonderful. The burbs are going to be able to offer 4 foreign languages, but we can't recruit a Spanish teacher to one. And the Spanish teacher is going, I can make a lot more money doing something else. We also, I think, and I wish I could get my brain to wrap around this more than just verbally talking about it. We artificially support a lot of education things because we get married to spouses, we share expenses. My significant other, I love her to death. She, however, has a little bit of an art supply problem as an art teacher. Don't hold it against her, but boy, I don't know how we can get all those colored pencils. And it's almost like the kids eat them every year, right? But if you think about it, right, how many times are we dipping in our own pocket?
Yeah.
And yet, if a surgeon did that, if a lawyer did that, if somebody like an engineer did that, then people would say, I'm out of here. We have to stop making this into a vocation when really it's a job. And there's some people who make a lot of money in education. Not going to lie to you. Some of those administrative positions are very well remunerated. But I don't want to get the phone call at 3 a.m. that the bus slid off the road coming back from a basketball game. I also don't want to have to do like some of the things we did when unfortunately we lost one of our students when I was teaching. He was killed over in Iraq, serving in the military. And then we had a series of events where a current student passed away due to some self-inflicted issues. And it got to the point, Melissa, where you could tell the teachers who cared, and you could tell the teachers who were in it for work and nothing else.
Yeah.
Was devastated. And there is a lot of points that people forget about. And I try to talk about that when I am teaching our novice pre-service teachers. You will fall in love, or you will find yourself in such an alien environment, you got to bounce. And that's the point that I think we need to talk about is it's okay to move on. You're not abandoning people.
Yeah.
But at the same point in time, the community and the first thing they always ask you, I remember when I was in my rural schools the first 2 times, they said, Mr. J, are you going to leave like all of the previous teachers? And I said, what do you mean all the previous teachers? I was the 6th social studies teacher for 2 positions in 3 years. And wow, right? And the students, they feel like they did something wrong. But in reality, what we don't do is we don't say, it's okay to look out for yourself. It's okay to look out for your family. It's okay to want to go live in a place where you got a supermarket that is open 24/7, or, you can get cell phone reception, or the radio doesn't censor some of the music because they don't like the lyrics,
So let's go there, because teachers really are the system. I mean, if you don't have teachers, you don't have a school. So it's important to talk about how do you keep them, especially if they're good for your system. So Casey, what are the most practical, low-cost moves that you've seen rural leaders make to either recruit good teachers into their systems or to retain them, especially if they're new to teaching? Because we know that within that first 3 to 5 years, that's where the turnover tends to happen. They leave the profession.
Absolutely. Got another offering that I talked about, thinking about teaching. Honestly, this is not very, very, very secretive. Get them married.
I've heard that.
Yes.
The matchmaker.
Seriously. All of the superintendents in the one area that I worked with, they're like, we got to set these people up. And I felt like Bumble for teachers, right? In this area. They're like, oh yeah, we've got a firefighter over here. I've got a police officer over here. I've got a farmer's kid over here. It's like, oh, darling, run. But the other thing is, what's even better is you got to treat them like professionals. I cannot tell you how many places I've been where I've seen very maternalistic or paternalistic approach to leadership, which it's not really leadership, it's management. They're adults too. Tell them why if we can't do something, or explain to them in a way. Let them vent at the minimum. Don't say, well, you're being insubordinate or you're just being wrong. And I think we saw this when the Department of Education announced its upcoming guidance on graduate degrees in education not being, quote, professional degrees. They're not, having gotten a master's in history and then a doctorate in education and teaching graduate level education courses, it's very professional. But the other point is we have a structural issue in smaller schools that will overwhelm teachers and make them want to leave.
Yeah.
Honestly, first thing we have to do is we have to start talking about sharing our resources. I love that classes are 10 and 12 and 14 students at the secondary level in some of these districts, and they're even smaller at the elementary level. But maybe neighbor buildings, like, you spend half the day in your home building teaching 7th and 8th grade, and then you go over to the other building and teach 7th and 8th grade, and the same thing happens for a 10, 11, and 11, 12 person. I know in rural districts especially, the physical education and lunch rules the roost when it comes to scheduling, because you gotta have cafeteria, right?
Yep.
And I don't know about you, but the funniest thing in the world was always the little pre-kindergartners who were in lunch with our gruffest older seniors. They had no shame. They would grab their milk, they'd go over to the senior, tap them on the shoulder and go, can you help me open my milk? And you'd watch it and the kid would be like, sure. And they'd be like, oh, that was really sweet of you. And they're like, no, that's my little brother, but it's one of those things where you watch it and you're just like, they didn't teach that in an administrative school.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that you do is coach leaders to focus on what they can control. And I think that's really, really important, because there are some things that are just outside their locus of influence. So Casey, can you give some of your favorite small system improvement routines, whether it's walkthroughs or schedule tweaks that can really help a small district think about outsizing their results?
One of the cool things is Dr. Wilcox, Dr. Baker, and a couple other folks at Albany talked about odds beating schools, where they looked at the demographics and then how they performed. Phenomenal research. I just wrote a paper that I've got to do some revising on about the 11 smallest schools in New York and their graduation rates. And one of the biggest areas that I've noticed is the all hands on deck approach at a rural school is an all hands on deck approach. And one of the coolest things in the world is when you take a walk up and down the hallway, you just go, are you okay? Are you good? Okay, not so good. And then I'd always ask the teachers to wave me in if they needed a bathroom break. I can't even tell you how much tea and coffee I would run from the places where there were tea and coffee down to them. I kept snacks in my office. My poor administrative assistant must have thought I was crazy when I'd be like, I need help getting these pretzel bags and chocolate in, you know? But again, I think a lot of it is we had a kindergarten teacher. It was her second year. She was trying to provide snacks for kids who didn't have a lot of food. And I just said, here you go. And she's like, oh, you didn't have to do that. I said, well, kindergarten teachers of the past unite. It's $20 off my nose and you are not making nearly what I am. Let me get you the snacks. Or, you know, ask the PTA to do something where not only do the teachers feel appreciated, but it's also a matter of, we had a very pregnant fourth grade teacher who I was constantly circling by her room because, boy, that baby was kicking that bladder, and hopefully he's going to be a major league soccer player when he grows up. You know, it's the little things like that. It's going and talking to some of your more veteran teachers who they've surrendered tens of thousands of dollars in salary in order to stay. And saying something like, you know, that was a master class you gave to your students. And I really need you to realize how in awe I am of that work, you know, because Melissa, they don't hear that a lot, right?
Okay.
We don't say, way to go. It's always, what are we doing wrong? We're in this constant improvement cycle, and we gotta go, you know what? You're really rocking it. The only thing I want you to improve upon is please get out of here before 5 o'clock. Please don't come in 2 hours before school starts. If I see you on the weekend, I'm going to be really angry at you. Not because I am, but because it means that we've set it up that they have to volunteer time.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people, unless they're married or they know somebody, realizes how much unpaid labor educators actually do.
Yeah, what you're talking about, Casey, is building culture, which is what you do as an instructional leader in a building that's highly effective. And yet you mentioned that many hats thing, where we know that rural leaders have a lot of those managerial tasks that they have to do too. And it's a fine balancing act to get both done and not be there on the weekends yourself with those teachers that you're kicking out of the building. So can you talk a little bit about how you coach leaders to make sure that they're able to take care of the managerial things while still being able to be an impactful instructional leader?
I think the best question is, what is crucial, critical, time sensitive versus what's crucial, critical, and not time sensitive, right? We often holler about mandates. We often holler about things that happen to us where it feels like somebody had no clue about our daily existence. Part of it is you got to be a little naughty. You know, you have to be a little naughty as a leader. You have to say, my teachers and my students are worth more than this compliance report to the state. And if they really want it, they'll send me an email that says, you've got 15 more days to do it. Or you call them and you go, you know what? We are in the midst of perpetual enjoyment of things that are going on here that you don't have a clue about. I need 30 more days. And 99.9% of the time they'll go, sure, because they're so understaffed, they can't look at it either. I also think part of it is you got to advocate with the Board of Education, understanding that in a larger, more professionally organized district, there are a lot of opportunities for teachers to go, I'm not dealing with that. Somebody else is going to have to deal with that. Or having a building where there are 4 administrative folks, that, I mean, granted, don't get me wrong, 700 kids in a building, grades K to 6 is insane. But, sometimes when you have 300 K to 12, you're doing bus duty, you're doing morning drop off, you've got a parent that you need to get a signature for special ed. Sometimes you need to sneak a backpack full of food to a parent so the kid doesn't have to take it home. Sometimes your cafeteria business manager comes up to you and goes, I accidentally ran out of leftovers because I gave it away to the kids to take home. Please don't tell the feds that. And the answer is, what feds? I mean, we had a district where we were throwing away, I would say, in the neighborhood of every single apple every day. Because when the U.S. Department of Agriculture says once they buy it, you got to toss it.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the thing. Why? I mean, I get it. They've got to do accounting. They want to make sure people don't buy it or whatever. But sometimes you got to be a little naughty. And what you tell all the students is at the end of the day, we have apples to take home. Take them home. Or you don't even say that. You just wander them through the cafeteria and they go, whoa, apple. And you're like, go ahead, take it. Or they'll go, you know what? Mom says she really wants to make an apple pie. Okay, take a bag. I don't care. And you don't turn the other cheek. You don't look the other way. But I'm sorry, Melissa, what were we just talking about, right?
Instructional leadership and managerial expectations of a school leader.
Yeah, exactly. No,
that's part of it, and that's part of that culture building. That's part about caring for your community and making sure that your students are taken care of and that your teachers have what they need to do their job.
Yeah, when you have 53% poverty rate in your school district, 53%. And we know as professionals, we know as researchers, the census data is nonsense. The census data undercounts probably by 10 to 20%. And then your free and reduced lunch numbers are always 20 to 30%, because goodness forbid you get a high school kid who needs to get free lunch. So what you do is you look at a way and you go, why don't we just give kids free breakfast and free lunch no matter what? And what happens is some of your wealthier and more affluent families, it's amazing what they volunteer when they realize that to be, quote, wealthy or affluent versus what they're actually seeing. And I love the elementary and middle school students because, my goodness, if we had a children's leadership group like England does, or Scotland, or Wales, or Ireland, and they turn to the parliamentarian and they go, so remind me again why we should be cutting benefits for people when you're driving around in your Jaguar, sir. It's like, oh, dang, mic drop, right? And I know that people are like, well, they got to work for it. They got to work for it. Well, I don't know about you, but I have met very few people in poverty who aren't working hard. The difference is that professionals, we have so many resources to fall back on. And I think one of the other issues we have to do is we really have to look at how younger teachers are being compensated in a lot of our districts. We have a school district in New York, upstate, that is paying $39,000 a year for a first-year teacher. And many of your listeners are going to go, yeah, have you seen North Carolina lately where it's like 20? It shouldn't be a race to the bottom. It needs to be something where we follow the German or the Japanese or the Finnish model of these professionals are compensated so they're not door dashing or they're not working as waiters and waitresses over the summer for tips. I mean, it's insane to me that the pay that we are paying teachers now, 20 some years after I started my teaching career, has not remotely kept up with inflation.
Not at all. Not at all. So this leads me to think about civics, because that's what you're talking about is somewhat, it's civics in action. And you're a social studies guy. So can you talk a little bit about how rural districts can teach civics in a way that feels relevant to kids and strengthens local democracy, which is really what the intent is to do? Absolutely.
So one of the points that I did was I said that we are not focusing in on the right things. Mm-hmm. We have become so STEM, STEAM, and AI focused that we've forgotten that a 4-year-old really wants to tell you their favorite dinosaur, right? A fourth grader wants to talk about ancient Egypt. There are cool things out there that we have to activate students' desires to see these things. And part of it is by making civics something that is not boring. If I hear another teacher going, well, I have them do a policy analysis paper, my goodness, with the number of kids between the ages of 18 and 25 that don't vote, could we please stop? Could we just tell them, I am giving you a 100 in participation in government. If you register to vote, you show up at some local meetings, and you ask good questions that come from a newspaper, preferably one that is a local paper, right? I think for a lot of districts, there are a lot of younger teachers, and there are even some experienced teachers who really don't want to face the wrath of their Board of Education by doing things like, let's talk about reality with civics. Things have become so partisan, and they've become so not even fake news anymore. It's just wrong that we have a lot of places where people don't have access to information. And so it is that when the kids are in the back seat, some radio stations specifically have broadcasts that talk about this is for the kids in the back seat, right? It's classical music, it's Science Friday, whatever. I have this thought that civics needs to be more than just saying, did you follow compliance? But are you actually interested in advocating for change? I got myself into a little bit of trouble when I was a third-year teacher because our parking lot was a mess because they were doing a building project. And so I said to the students, well, you can work on this. This is a project you're very passionate about. The principal did not think so. And so what happened was all of these seniors were like, well, what do you mean we can't talk about parking? And their response was, well, this was a decision that was made and you don't get a say in it. And the kid's response is, that's not cool. And that's something that I think if we keep saying that, you know, we want you to be compliant. We want you to be, we want you to be part of this regimentation. Then what happens is we have a group of future citizens who hear that the Constitution has checks and balances in it, and they understand that it was created in 17 something or another. But Melissa, if you can Google it, that's not great. What you got to do is you got to teach them to understand what they got to Google, why they got to Google it, and how to check and make sure that it's not an AI hallucination. And they're very passionate about doing right. I cannot tell you how proud of so many different groups that I have seen who they have launched, battle of the classes where $1 subtracts from the total, but it still goes to the donation. Versus that gets you points. So $1 in a can will screw up 100 pennies. And then when you talk about to them, well, what are you going to do with the money? This was a class fundraiser. Are you going to use it for your senior trip? And they're like, no, we know that a family lost their house. They need the money more than we do. Or, we know that there is a group of people in the neighboring village that, the father got really hurt on a farm accident and they put a GoFundMe up. So we'd like to try and you talk to these folks and you're staring at a 15, 16-year-old and you're going, you are more mature, more caring than 45-year-olds. And you ask them why, and they're like, I just know it's the right thing to do. Whether it's Christian, whether it's scouting, whether it's their families, some of these young folks, Melissa, I mean, I know you get a chance to hand awards to some of these young people at the conferences and things, but boy, oh boy, our newspapers really got to talk about their leadership because they are running circles around adults, what they're doing for people.
Yeah. Let's jump into that, Casey, because you do write op-eds and you testify, and you're using local stories to really leverage the messaging, right? So can you talk from your experience about what really turns a local story, like what you're talking about with your students, into a persuasive advocacy piece? Walk us through the elements of those kinds of things, whether it's a written or a statement that you're giving in a subcommittee hearing.
Well, for me, one of the biggest areas that I think is so important is the power of the individual. And if you see something that don't work, you fix it and you overcome obstacles to fixing it. So we had a young man who earned the highest rank in Scouting America. It's called the Eagle. And the project was outstanding because he had some neurodivergency and still does growing up. He's safely ensconced at a large institution studying engineering and doing math in 3 dimensions using Greek letters, so life is good. But he realized that his middle and elementary school needed sensory walls. And so on his own as a 16-year-old, he got the $10,000 needed to put these things up, collaborated with the principals and the teachers, and invited 45 other people to help him create this sensory walls for these 2 buildings. And you look at it and you're like, Angie did that while taking AP Euro. Angie did it while taking AP Bio. Angie did it while working a job. Whoa, where'd you have time for all this? Looked me dead in the face, square in the eyes, and said it needed to be done. The Board of Ed, all perfectly logical adults. Well, and he's like, nope, I'm going to fix this. I am going to do this. I think another area that what we need to do is what we have to do is more than just telling these great stories. We have to make people understand how the financial cuts rob our next generation. Yep. And I use the word rob because I don't know about you, but I look at these young men and women and folks sitting in their chairs, and I look at how interested they are in learning first aid and learning CPR, how they're like, whoa, that bug is so awesome. or whoa, that tree did this, or what do you mean cow crap can fertilize crops? And you think about it, and I had a student who hated 7th grade chemistry, hated it. It's one of those courses in 7th grade where you do a little bit of bio, a little bit of chemistry, a little bit of earth science, a little bit of physics, a little bit of this and that. Kid looked at me and he said, I don't understand why I need to do this. I'm going to be a farmer. And I said, oh, really? So then what I was able to do was to have this young man talk to Cornell Cooperative Extension about what chemistry do farmers need to know. And like, oh, they're just an, and he said the word to me, they're just an egghead professor. And I said, okay, well, let's go out to the proving station, right? And when he got out to the proving station, he was like, wow, it smells like cow crap out here. And I said, you're absolutely right, because they're testing different nitrogen fixing bacteria. Well, why would they do that? Well, if you give them too much nitrogen, it's going to burn. If you give too little, it's going to starve. And sometimes you got to add phosphate, sometimes you don't. And oh, by the way, did you know that they use certain ground cover? And he's looking at me, and all of a sudden, there is no behavior issue. There is no problem. He wants to talk about nature. He wants to talk about the farm. He wants to talk about chemistry. He's asking questions about ammonium nitrate. And I'm like, you did not look up the handbook, did you? The boy handbook online? He's like, no, I would never look up the anarchist cookbook, Dr. J. And I'm like, we're going to have a conversation with you and the librarian about what you can look at on school property. Like, who did it on school property? I did it at home. But, Melissa, one of the things that I also think we got to realize is that kids don't have access to media outside of school or school
Many
related.
of them don't.
I mean, there are reports on the New York State report card for every district. And I was just glancing through, not enough to do an analysis. Almost 70% of kids in our smallest NCES code 43, which is rural remote schools, they don't have things at home unless the school sends it home. So they don't have a tablet. They don't have a laptop. A lot of their phones that the families have, they don't get cell signals. So they have to have a router. And these are expensive. And when you only have what the community decides it wants and it limits opportunities, we're not preparing students for their next step, whether it's work, whether it's college, whether it's the military, whatever. I mean, we're pushing hard to get entrepreneurs to build stuff. It seems to be a thing. And, I had the fortune of being in entrepreneurial sessions at Rensselaer Polytechnical Institute, one of the best science opportunities in the world. I asked their folks, I said, do you ever get into the hill country? And they went, it's really hard because it's expensive. And not only that, but the grant from the federal government wants us to hit as many underrepresented children as we can. And they went, okay, so what does that mean? And they said, we get bigger bang for the buck and more credit if we're in an urban environment. I understand. But our rural kids are underrepresented too.
Yep, that's right. So, Casey, I know that there are a lot of things that are coming at rural leaders right now. There's, you mentioned AI, there's assessments, chronic absenteeism is a thing that everyone is tracking, whether they're urban, suburban, rural, doesn't matter. We're all looking at that. Mental health for students, pipeline issues. But what in your experience and in your conversations that you've had with rural leaders, are they really, should they be preparing for? What are those trends in the next 3 to 5 years that they should be prepared for?
Ooh, that's a great question because, everybody's coming up to snuff on artificial intelligence. In fact, half of them are using it to write letters that they don't want to write to parents, right? The other half are using it to make their grocery list. Totally understand. I get it. I think for the big area that we have to be prepared for is we are going to see changes in borderland communities. What I mean by that are rural communities that are just outside of the suburban sprawl and are still classified as a near rural or a rural mid-distance or a rural remote, which the federal government says 5 miles, 10 miles, 15 miles away from an urban area. To me, what I think they're going to need to be prepared for is the consistent change in people who are buying property and converting it into short-term rentals and are pricing out families and are pricing out their teachers. I think the other area that they need to really pay attention to is how these rural areas are going to be directly impacted by when companies decide they're going to put AI power plants in their region. It's shocking how much power, water, etc. some of these plants are utilizing. And I don't think, I don't think that the zoning boards or the town boards are seeing anything but the payment in lieu of taxes. I don't think they're really understanding how this is going to impact, like, whether or not their community is going to be able to survive. And finally, the other area is the aging issue. A lot of our best and brightest are retiring, and I don't blame them. What I do see, though, is I don't see people looking at folks who want to do a second act, or they're a little different, or they're not quite from here. These are all talent wasted opportunities. And I had a colleague of mine who was unemployed for 4 years because COVID, the pandemic, whatever, right? They've taken a job as a home health teacher tutor. And part of it is that this person is so bright, so smart, so on the spectrum, and couldn't make it through interviews because they're like, well, you just don't quite fit the culture here. What culture is that? We pride ourselves in saying that we will take care of your kids. We will take care of this community. But if we don't expose people to the best and the brightest, what we do is we set up an artificial expectation so that when the students arrive at a community college, or they arrive at a regional school, or they arrive at a big R1, or they arrive in a big city, and they run into the first person who is demonstrating some socio-emotional or mental health issues, they're going to be like, I'm out of here, peace out. Karen Kafelis did such a good job about talking about the 4 types of students: the stayers, the goers, the boomerangers, and I apologize, I can't remember the 4th off the top of my head. But boy, oh boy, between that book and Jen Sherman's Dividing Paradise, as well as Jay Parton's book called Code Switching, about rural teachers who are hired into urban areas, we're still seeing things where we're just not utilizing both sides of the dollar. We're allowing very talented people to stay home on the couch because it's easier. Let's not fight that battle. Let's not bring them in.
Yeah, those are good things for people to think about. I appreciate those. So, Casey, I always end with the same question, and that is, what does the term rural advantage mean to you?
So, Melissa, for me, rural advantage starts with the fact that this is not deficit thinking. This is advantage thinking. I cannot even tell you how astronomically great a public education with private school size and curriculum is. I think that the other area is the opportunities. While you may not have dressage horseback riding, and you may not have Russian, French, German, and Italian, but you have the students in the district I used to work with, they're going to Costa Rica for their Spanish club trip, right? We have opportunities where students are doing a research examination of the creek to see how polluted it is from local farming vis-a-vis road runoff, vis-a-vis other efforts. You don't get that in suburbia. You may get an advanced placement or an international baccalaureate, but you don't get the place-based. This is cool. You guys have an opportunity. You folks have an opportunity to doing something spectacular. Science, STEM, technology class was doing line followers. They were doing the marshmallow launchers, and they were doing mousetrap cars. That's similar to sophomore year curriculum at Rensselaer Polytechnical Institute. Top 50 in the country. Now, granted, they weren't getting the advanced algebra or the college level calculus, but could you imagine being a kid who never thought they could do engineering, being taught how to do engineering skills? This is like, wow, this is awesome. The rural advantage is the opportunities presented to you in a rural school, while on face value may not look in depth, but once you start digging, once you start understanding, they're doing more with less, and they're doing it day in and day out, and they're not crying, they're not begging, they're advocating appropriately, and they sure as heck aren't suing to get extra money.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you, Casey.
You're welcome.
Well, I want to thank you for your time and for telling the truth about what rural schools face, and really for talking us through some of the practical moves that rural leaders and educators can do in their districts. So thanks for spending some time with me today.
You're welcome. It was my honor and privilege, and I hope to have the opportunity to spend a lot more time with folks interested about how to make rural better.
Well, and so friends, here's my ask. Pick an idea from today or grab one of Casey's books and let us know what is out there that might have some potential for change in your district that can help bolster or inform. And make sure that you tell us what happens, because your stories sharpen all of us. If this conversation gave you something useful, please like the episode and subscribe to the Rural Scoop. Leave a comment with your takeaway and share it with a colleague who cares about strengthening our rural communities through their rural schools. Your ratings and reviews really help other leaders find us, and I do take the time to read every note. Also, make sure to connect with me on LinkedIn to keep the conversation going. I'm your host, Melissa Sadorf, and remember, in rural leadership, our strength is in our shared story. When we lead together, we thrive together. I'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Rural Scoop. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep these important rural conversations going. And we'd love to hear from you, so feel free to leave a comment or share your thoughts. You can follow along and never miss a new release by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform or by following us on social. We're on YouTube at The Rural Scoop, Instagram at msadorf1, and X at msadorf03. The Rural Scoop is produced with support from Vela Educational Consultants. To learn more, visit velaconsultants.com. See you next time for more great discussions about rural education. And as always, keep leaning in to the rural advantage.